Yeah, there are so many things you could say about Bhante, aren't there? So I'm going to really try and just tell a few stories from my own. I suppose it's funny calling it a relationship. You know, is that what it is when it's someone you hardly know personally, and maybe connection's the right word. Actually, I'm happy with the word relationship. I'm definitely in some sort of relationship with him. Perhaps as Holly suggested, since I first came in here, although of course I wasn't aware of that at first. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a photo, and I'm actually just going to check it's not on the shrine. And funnily enough, I tried to get a copy of it a year or so ago and I couldn't, and I've realised I don't mind because the importance of this picture's sort of lodged in my mind. So it's a photo of Bhante. I would guess he's 70-something, so taken in the 1990s. He's sitting in his garden in Birmingham. But a lot of you will probably recognise it from the description. So there's a big bright canopy of green leaves behind him. He's wearing a dark blue suit and a tie. He's smiling quite sort of vividly, quite brightly. And one of his ankles is propped on the other knee. Okay? And on the foot of that leg is a kind of a deck shoe or plimsoll or something. So there's this man in sort of old-style metal-rimmed glasses, greyish-white hair, dark suit, tie, and sort of gym shoes. And I remember looking at it. It might be the first picture of him I saw, I'm not sure. But I remember looking at it thinking, there's something interesting going on here. You know, he's so... he looks completely relaxed, composed, at least happy. I mean, it's probably something more than that. I wouldn't know what to call it, but he's beaming, really. So he looks completely relaxed, but incredibly engaged. And it slightly arrests you. It's as though you're standing in a room with a person. You almost feel like you ought to greet it, if you see what I mean. And so there's this combination of things. You've got an Englishman. I mean, it makes me think of my grandfather, who every day, almost till he died, got up and put on a shirt, tie and jacket. Do you see what I mean? He was of that generation, whatever he was doing. I mean, think if he was just at home scribbling away on his endless book, spending time with my grandma, he'd put on his tie and jacket. And so you've got an Englishman, but I knew by then that he was the founder of this whole thing that I was starting to get involved in. He's in this bright green garden, and he's wearing gym shoes. And I thought, so what's, you know, it sort of holds something important for me, this picture. I'm sure he was just being practical, you know, he's probably, I don't know, maybe he was involved in a long photo shoot, or he'd been walking in the garden or whatever, and that was the best footwear for the day. But I thought there was something sort of playful about it, relaxed, but like I say, very incredibly sort of engaging gaze. So that's one of my early memories of him, if you like, is that picture. And I'd been coming along, I think, less than a year when, on a retreat, I just overheard somebody saying, we'd just come out of a week's silence at lunch, someone saying, oh, you can meet him, you know. They were saying it to someone else, but I sort of, my ears pricked up. You know, I wrote down the email address, went straight home, wrote, and had an appointment to see him within a few weeks, which surprised me a lot. And you're not sure how to check that out with someone. You want to say, he'll meet me? You know, why would he meet me? Why would he spend an hour with me? But of course, he'd meet anyone who wanted to go and see him. So I went on what I've since thought of as a pilgrimage to Birmingham. It didn't occur to me that it was like that at the time, but I took a day off, I took the train, I got out in this sort of newly developed urban kind of centre of Birmingham, and I had bags of time in my hands so that I didn't muck it up, you know. And there was this mariachi band playing in the square in Birmingham on a kind of really grey summer's day, and I took this suburban bus out of town. I don't think I'd ever been to Birmingham. And I just remember finding it all very, very unusual. None of it matched what you would think of as going to meet a Buddhist teacher, although I don't know if it ever does. I mean, I hope it never does. You know, I hope it's never the sort of picture book, postcard sort of experience in a way. And the meeting itself was sort of, or the talk was not especially memorable. He asked me about my life. I told him some things. how I got involved and all that. I gave him some flowers. I brought him this bunch of white lilies. You know, when you've been gripping something all day, it had this sort of sweaty, crumpled white paper around the bottom, and finally gave them to him, and he got out of his chair, and, you know, he can't see very well, and he was in slippers this time, and he sort of leapt out the chair and said, "I'll take those." And I tried to say, there's this little tussle. I wanted to say, "Or just give me directions, I'll put them away." You know, I wanted to give them to him and then go and find some water, because I thought, now he looked more elderly than I took him to be more elderly than he was, in a way, I think because of his impaired sight. And I thought, now he's going to go next door with the flowers, trip over. That'll be it, and they'll know it was me. But similar things apparently go through the minds of anyone visiting him. Ask Mitra Bandhi for his equivalent of that. It's very funny, his first meeting. So I do remember, actually, I wanted to ask him, what's going through your mind now that you're, I can't remember the euphemism I found for this because I didn't know him, but I want to say, now that you're getting towards the end of your life, you know, what's coming into your mind? I found a way of saying it, and I do remember his answer to that. He said, well, people above all, and he said, people in Kalimpong at the moment. That's the hill town in India where he spent 14 years as a young monk. And he said, I've been remembering people I didn't know very well, such as the man who came to cut my hair and the man who came to my house once a year to collect scrap paper. So it's the two examples he just sort of trotted out, and I thought, oh, how interesting. He was reaching at that point, I don't know, 65 years back in his mind, something like that, and remembering a man who came to his house once a year. I mean, that's also another era, isn't it? Someone who you'd hand them your scrap paper from the year, and perhaps this man sold it, I don't know. Anyway, you know, it was a sort of cordial, ordinary meeting in a way. But the next little experience I want to tell you about is that just a week or two later I had a dream in which he was younger, sort of lithe, energetic. He leapt out of his chair again, but he could have been sort of one of my school teachers, sort of middle-aged, wearing a shirt, sort of leapt up to greet me, and he said he had to move this enormous gold balloon out of the way, and he said, "Sorry about this, it's been my birthday." And I was just remembering it was his birthday around that time. It was August that I met him, so it must have been around exactly this time of year. This enormous solid gold balloon. They said, apologise for the gold balloon kind of thing, and tried to get it out of the way, but it was solid, it wasn't. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it was this canopy here. It's exactly that shape, and that sort of had that burnished sort of quality to it, and I think that's the serpent Mukhalinda protecting the Buddha, that's what it reminds me of anyway, from the rain. Is it just before or just after his enlightenment? But I liked that this sort of extremely beautiful thing was sort of awkwardly large and in the way, related to his birthday, but was clearly plucked from this shrine room where I was starting to spend, I suppose, quite a lot of time. So that's all about 5 years ago. And then, so I'm going to skip forward some years later now, when I was training for ordination and going on the retreats at Padmaloka that you do to prepare. And I'm not quite sure what led to it really, but there's a stupa to Dado Rinpoche, one of Bhante's main teachers at Padmaloka. We tend to gather around it for a closing ritual at the end of the retreat. Padmavajra, one of the ordination team there, just said a short piece about Bhante's friendship with Dado, whose relics are in that stupa that we circumambulate during rituals. And we walked around it chanting, people peel off and pick up their cases and start getting in taxis and so on. And I was the last walking around it, and I had this, I don't really know how to get to the explanation of it. I felt overwhelmed with emotion, incredibly grateful, and rather as though something was coming down from the sky that was to do with these two men. So that's the bit I don't know how to explain. So it's a beautiful blue sky, and these two people who'd been evoked were really, really present, and their friendship was the important thing. That was the thing, what Padmavajra had emphasised. And I realised that although my parents and family had given me what I sort of called later like my biological life, and to an extent, you know, a sort of emotionally positive one, I now felt, it's sort of a conversion moment for some reason. I now felt that my real life had been given to me by Bhante. So the sort of whole background of that, I suppose, is that, I'd moved in here, I started working at the LBC, and I was training for ordination, and I was doing what I could to, I suppose, align myself a bit more with the vision that he's had of living as a Buddhist in the West. So details some other time, but that's quite a significant thing to, like I say, at least try to do. And that really was becoming my life, and I realised that he really had given me what I now felt was my life. You could say spiritual, he'd given me my spiritual life, but that sounds a bit like something else. I want more to say like my real life. I felt like he had given it to me. And it's very, very clear and very moving. So lastly, or maybe second to lastly, I met him again very, very briefly in March, just before I went on the ordination retreat at Guyaloka. And so this, well, sometime later, and I knew that I was about to step into this, we'll have this initiation in a way, fully into this committed life, at least, that he's envisioned, and this ordination that he's entirely devised, the sort of richness of which is starting to dawn on me, the Dharmachari or Dharmacharini ordination that he came up with, really, and developed himself, which you don't find anywhere else. And I knew that I just wanted to take his hand and say thank you. I did manage to do that. I could only see him for about 5 minutes. He hadn't slept well. He's been in much more fragile health, again, as Holly mentioned, the last few years, so very much depends how he's feeling that day, whether you can spend time with him or not. And he hadn't slept well, but he said he was happy to meet me anyway. I was shown through, able to sort of take his hand and say thank you. We chatted very briefly. And I realised what I wanted to do. I'd been, they'd been clear, a couple of minutes. So I realised what I wanted to do was just mention the people that we both knew. So I just wanted to say, I'm friends with Luke, who you saw the other day. March Bandy is my preceptor. I live in the next door room to Deva Mitra. I work with Sangharakshita and others. And that was the quickest way I could find to just touch on the common ground, if you see what I mean. And when I came out, I realised this person who I'd only met twice, actually I really do feel close to him. I don't mean personally close, of course. And things like the dream with the balloon seem to sort of, I think they're the mind longing for that, if you see what I mean, because I had that initial meeting in Birmingham, and then the more familiar sort of birthday meeting in the dream. But maybe that doesn't matter, because I do really feel close to him, and I'm not even sure. I mean, it's I'm really glad that we've had this talk from Holly, and then I'm giving one as someone who's met him just twice. I'm not even sure I would have needed to meet him, actually, because I realised, well, these people that I know that he knows, his life has fed into theirs so much that it's so much more present than I realised. It's just sort of everywhere. I think it's in this room, it's sort of out there in the foyer, it's in the community I live in, but it's easy to miss. So it's quite easy to overlook that, actually, in a way, I think if you feel committed to this order and movement, you are close to him. And that's definitely how I feel. I've got 1 or 2 more minutes? Or yeah, okay. So just want to say one thing about the Ordination Course that I came back from about a month ago. So it's a 16-week retreat, and so you've got the usual constraints: no phones, newspapers, you can't go out and all that. So in a good way, there's not very much to do. So people read a lot in the time off they have. There's a little library at Guyaloka, and it's full of lots of copies of his memoirs. And they were, what's the word? There was a high premium on some of the volumes. There was one that I actually waited almost the whole retreat for it to go back to the library. It never did. Someone else must have left it unfinished anyway. It was very hard for me when I first found out, they're going to advise you not to take novels to read at Guyaloka. I was like, sorry, I quite like poetry. I'll pack some poetry and read the memoirs, it's okay. And dived into 1 or 2 volumes myself. There was this one I couldn't get at. But what that meant was there was this real culture of his life, completely live on the retreat. So if you don't have that many books to read and nobody's going out and coming back and being distracted by things, well, your talk or the collective atmosphere really harmonises. And one of the things it harmonised around was his life. So everybody is sort of getting familiar with anecdotes, him advising a film crew in Delhi for some weeks, meeting these English missionaries and doing his best sort of to be cordial and sort of not ironic about their condescension towards him as a Buddhist, and all sorts of things that you could mention. But I realised that his life was completely there as well. It was really at Guyaloka on that retreat. And something else I read was his book, The History of My Going for Refuge, which is a bit of a technical read, but I really, really valued it, and it was the right time for me to read it, because what that shows is how his life translates into the ordination that we'd all just been given. So he's mapping his understanding of this thing going for refuge, which can sound a bit mysterious at first, from his life, in a way, onto ours. Because as Bhante said, he founded the order when he felt there were enough people whose understanding going for refuge coincided with his, at least enough to ordain them. And that's what we were all doing. So the 16 of us getting ordained, our understanding coincided at least enough to do that. And in this account, he shows the way his thinking unfolded into this sort of beautiful thing that had just been unleashed in all our lives at the ordinations. So, yes, I realise sort of how grateful I am that his culture is actually everywhere, even if we don't notice it, and it's possible to feel really quite close to him if we are at least trying to take steps towards aligning our life in some way with his and resonating with that sort of ultimate expression of his life's work, which is this going for refuge. Yeah. Okay, thank you.